We find later, Paul writes of the situation when Peter comes to visit them. Revival was breaking out and people were getting saved right and left. Peter comes to visit, and while he was there, he comes to visit. He sat down. Peter sat down. Hey, Peter sat down with a Gentile, and they had a meal. So, well, maybe we were wrong about Peter. Maybe we judged him early. He's now sitting down and having full fellowship with Paul and then these Gentile believers. I mean, maybe we were wrong about Peter. But then a group from Jerusalem shows up, and Peter jumps up and says, "Oh, well, let's have dinner over you, brethren." He didn't want to eat with the Gentiles. He was ready to eat with the Jewish brethren from Jerusalem, but he would not have anything to do with them. Paul rebuked Peter. Yes, Paul rebuked Peter because just under the idea that, listen, which is you going to stand on, Peter? Which is it? Are you going to eat with the Gentiles or not? Are you for them or not? Which is it? And Paul rebuked Peter. Peter had a problem with it. Hopefully, and we think maybe he did, that Peter got over that problem. But also, those in the early church had a bad problem with this. They were willing to hear about these Gentiles getting saved, but they didn't want them to come to Jerusalem. I mean, the thing they had heard about was Paul was with Gentiles, and we're certainly not going to have that. But that spirit of respect to persons went over to something far worse than just the Gentile believers. And the situation that James is describing here, we find a situation where believers in Christ, whether they were Jew or they were Gentile, whichever it was, now we have a different aspect on this. Here were some that were coming into their company. Some may be visiting their group. Some were of wealth. Some were maybe of importance in a different way. And they said, "Oh, come in, brother. Come on, let's have you a good seat." And in the meantime, they're accidentally stepping on one of the other Christians. Oh, excuse me. Putting one in a place of preeminence at the expense of stepping on someone else as a footstool. James says, "Brethren, this should not be. Respect the persons should not be there." And I'm afraid in our churches, even nowadays, we have people that are like that. In my Christian experience down through the years, I've seen some, maybe a preacher who comes into a big revival meeting or something that comes to visit, and when another preacher is preaching, I've seen people even take them, and the little bitty preacher, they say, "Oh yeah, it's good to see you, brother. It's really, really good. I'm glad you could come." Then here comes the Mr. Important preacher, the one that's more popular, the one that more people know. "Oh, brother, it's so good to have you here." And he gets up to an announcement, and he has him leading prayer. "Brother, we're glad to have brother so-and-so," and then he goes on to tell all these accomplishments he's had, and it's really, really, really good to have this wonderful brother doing all the tremendous things he's doing in our service. Would you please lead us in prayer? But here's this other brother, probably laboring just as hard, possibly more faithful than this other man. He's just put on the background, and many times not even mentioned that he's even in the house. He said you have respected persons. We have such things in churches nowadays. Sometimes this is caused by financial status. That's what James was addressing here. He said you have some in these nice fancy clothes. Oh, you make them of a special treat. I mean, you make sure everything's right for them, but you're forgetting about that person who may not be as financially well off as they are. James says, "Brethren, this should not be." To have true unity in the way that the church should be, we shouldn't be exalting one person higher than another one just because they have a little bit bigger bank account. In fact, James goes on to explain it's not the rich that torment you. It's not those that give you trouble. Are they not the ones that give you trouble in the past? Those rich in this world's goods. He says, but those that are rich in faith, as far as God is concerned, is a whole lot more should be a whole lot more received than even necessarily those who have money. But yes, that's the way it is in many other cases. They put a lot of fanfare on someone that's famous, but yet somebody's not so famous, they want to play them down some. When the truth is, in God's eyes, Maybe that man that seems to be of lowly income or lowly stature, whatever, that man may be more faithful to God. If we only really truly knew the truth, if we really knew how true they were to God, in many cases, maybe more faithful than that more famous person. But at the same time, then God, when the ones that God gives more opportunities, got to have more responsibility, and they have more responsibility where they have to serve God. They have to do these things. And when they're put in the limelight, when they're put on the show place, they must have these qualities. But I tell you what, when some of these people, I've seen this happen, where some preachers, if their horn is not tooted, they get all upset. Because after all, we all like our horn tooted, don't we? It's an unauthorized proverb says that he that tooteth not his own horn shall not be tooted. And that's not King James, by the way, by no means. But some people, they get all bent out of shape, but somebody is not exalting them. And those that are truly great in the sight of the Lord are those who are of a meek and humble spirit, where they're not being exalted all the time. But we have it in our churches. Many times it's financial status where people look down on others. And God help a church where there's some in the church. And by the way, in most churches, from most of what I've seen, the financial status ranges from very low to sometimes very rich. I am not the very rich. Let's get that straight to start with. I don't think of myself as the very poor, but listen, I'm not the very rich. But you know, there are some churches, they have some rich folks in the church. I don't think we have any around here. Do we? No rich folks. But some churches do. But yet still the emphasis of the gospel goes out, and the ministries seem to be bigger than when a congregation is larger. They have some come in their congregation that may be of lowly means. And they're welcomed into a congregation, or are they? Where some would not dare shake the hand. The only time that rich man ever shook their hand is when maybe they had a handshake and coming in to accept somebody into the church. Other than that, they're not going to get their hand shook. They're just not going to do it. But yet at the same time, that kind of an attitude, that kind of a display makes that person who maybe not had the financial means, makes them feel inferior, where they don't even try to shake that rich man's hand. He says you shouldn't have respect to persons, brethren. You shouldn't have that. Sometimes it's family, social status. Sometimes it's not necessarily the money, but who they're related to. I mean, if it's a cousin of another cousin, or a cousin of somebody in the church, they want to make sure that they make them happy. If somebody comes new into the church, they just don't seem to have time to talk to them. And the church grows, and they just are simply another face somewhere. There's respected persons. Sometimes it's on education. Somebody that's really brilliant in the school, or has got a couple of doctors after their name and things like this, they seem to be more popular or more respected from that person who maybe struggled to get through high school. That's respected persons. God is not pleased with that. Sometimes it's the clothes they wear. And I think in some people, in some churches, they come to the church specifically for the purpose of showing off what they've got to wear. I would go on to say that I do not. I don't have anything to show off. I don't care to do that. As far as I'm concerned, that's silly. I'm not into that kind of junk. But some people, one of their whole reasons for coming to church is maybe somebody can see this new outfit I got. Well, so what? If that new outfit, is it supposed to make you better than that brother who cannot afford another outfit? But you know, a lot of times those people that can afford all those new outfits, they have a sort of hard time giving them toward missions or something like that. Whereas that poor man, here he is, offering up the very last dime he has sometime just to support the cause of God's work. It's respect the person. Sometimes it's an automobile. Sometimes it's some people's driving a bigger automobile than others, so they want to make a big deal over them. But yet, the man who's driving the one that may have to push home to get it there, they don't say much about him. They lift one high and think higher of another one, but then they think lower of another person. That's respect the person. Sometimes it's in housing. Sometimes people live in very nice houses that God has given them, and thank God for that. But I'll tell you what, sometimes it ain't the house that God gave them. It's the one that they're struggling and just barely keeping their head above water to be able to support. You ever seen a swan on the lake? They're real graceful. Real graceful. Swim around and say, oh my, they're so calm. They got everything under control. Nothing alarms them. But if you look up underwater, their feet are going wide open.